In recent years, supernatural creatures have taken centre stage in popular culture, from wizards and witches in Harry Potter, to vampires in the True Blood and Twilight Saga, to various superheroes from the DC and Marvel universes. Characters once maligned as mere fantasy have become mainstream. All these creatures and beings come with elaborate mythologies. These mythologies include origin stories, complex rules around what the characters can and cannot do, and typically they provide a narrative in which many issues of human morality can be explored. Many of these stories suggest something about human nature and also give a commentary on reality in this time. And this is particularly true of the increasingly popular fantasy genre, which in shorthand is referred to as the zombie apocalypse. Now, I say that the zombie apocalypse is fantasy, yet there are many people out there who are preparing for a zombie uprising with a vigour and enthusiasm not seen since Y2K. For example, here on Amazon, you can find a zombie survival pack. This is the 3-day survival kit, complete with all of those things. But that particular website sells a huge range of these particular survival kits. So 3-day up to 90-day. The 90-day survival pack might include such items as a crossbow, gas mask, even ammunition cases covered in zombie images, just so that you remember which bullets you're reserving for the oncoming zombie horde. God forbid you confuse your regular ammunition with your zombie-themed ammunition. Zombies first made a major impact on popular culture through movies, in particular the movies of George A. Romero. Beginning with The Night of the Living Dead in 1968 and continuing through several more films, Romero used zombies as a way of making poignant social commentary on the present-day world. His films are not an examination of zombies, they are a mirror created to reflect back an image of ourselves that we may not be comfortable with. When creating the movie that is widely regarded as the forerunner to all zombie stories we now enjoy, which I now enjoy, Romero originally planned for the lead character to be a truck driver. So he had this idea of that will be my protagonist, a truck driver. He's from the southern states of America. He's got drawling speech, rough, burly, bearded guy. However, during the auditioning process, the standout actor was a man named Dwayne Jones. This is significant because Jones was African American. At the time, remember this was 1968, African American men were seldom cast in the lead role of any film, the only exception being Sidney Poitier, who, to be honest, had only had a couple of leading roles at the time. Romero decided to cast Jones in the lead role because he was the best person for the job. But by doing so, his zombie movie shifted from a mere horror film to being a social commentary on race relations in America. Suddenly, a story of survival against zombies became a metaphor for the African American struggle for civil rights. Unsurprisingly, critics loved the greater narrative of the film, a film which in just about every other respect was a fairly average, maybe even less than average, horror film. Romero cleverly continued this trend of social commentary in his subsequent films. In 1978's Dawn of the Dead, Romero used the zombie framework to attack the growing consumer culture in America. In 2005's Land of the Dead, Romero highlighted the growing gap between rich and poor. And in 2007's Diary of the Dead, Romero picked up on reality television, particularly our present-day ability to film almost everything we do. The point I'm making here is that while on the face of it these films appear to be nothing more than mindless, gory horror, They are, in fact, multi-layered, artistic statements that reflect back aspects of our lives that we aren't always prepared to acknowledge. Romero's greatest success is that his films popularised an entire genre, which now includes numerous big-budget Hollywood films every year. Here we have two of them just from the last year or so. World War Z with Brad Pitt, quite a big film, and Warm Bodies. This is a little favourite of mine, actually. It's very subtle, but actually it's Romeo and Juliet. Romeo is a zombie, and Juliet isn't, so there you go. It was surprisingly clever. In fact, there you go, the proof is my wife watched it and she thought it was okay. My point's made. But zombies are also a significant player in the publishing industry. Real book, right there. Some of you, I've shown you that one before, I think. But also, possibly the most popular zombie incarnation is an award-winning television drama that is one of the most watched programs in history, The Walking Dead. On screens, it was on last night, in fact. So zombies are big business. Lots of money tied up in this whole industry. In fact, just so that I'm really clear in the point that I'm making here, 5 weeks ago, it was an episode of this program that became the most watched cable television program ever. More people watched a single episode of this series as it was playing on television for the first time than watched the moon landing. That's a lot of people. Now, I also sort of quietly want to mention this because I cop a certain amount of flack for being a zombie fan. When I advertised this talk, lots of people sort of rolled their eyes and made comments about the eccentric vicar and his zombie fascination. Let me be clear. The popularity of The Walking Dead, this series in particular, what it demonstrates is that the zombie genre has stepped right into the mainstream, and zombie fans will very soon outnumber those who know nothing about it. So I'm the normal one, and the rest of you need to get on board or you'll be left behind. I say hopefully. So anyway, why am I talking about zombies here in the context of our church? While this may come as a surprise, engaging with zombie mythology is something Christians must consider doing as we struggle to connect with the world outside the church door. Zombie films, books and television series are consumed by huge numbers of people across the world because, and this is the reason, this mythology is spiritually engaging. It's connecting with that part of people. Now, I'm not saying that zombieism or following zombie in some sense is a new religion. It isn't, at least not yet. There are some people who are quite keen on this idea of the Church of Zombie, but there's no real signs of it emerging so far. What I am saying is that this mythology speaks into unspoken longings of those who connect with it. Within the zombie narrative are messages and stories that deeply resonate with people. Within the zombie universe, characters routinely engage in deep existential issues, such as, what does it mean to be human? What are the consequences of violence? And even, where is God in all of this? Now this is exciting because the zombie genre touches on many things within its storytelling that we, as Christians, can actually begin to dialogue with. So, a couple of points that we as Christians need to know about the zombie apocalypse. Firstly, the zombie apocalypse is not about zombies. Again, some of you have heard me say this before. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive. You think zombie film, surely it's about going and seeing the zombies, but there's more to it than that. Stories set in the zombie universe are actually about humans struggling to survive in a world overrun by the living dead. Typically, the story centres on a group of survivors who are drawn from diverse backgrounds, who are forced together through exceptional circumstances. So why is that an appealing storyline? Well, it articulates a strong desire for community. And more than that, it affirms diverse community. Just to prove that, this is a picture promoting the current season of The Walking Dead, and that's the main cast that are appearing in this particular series, and they are a fairly diverse bunch. There is a broad ethnic base to this group, a wide age range, and they are all people from different walks of life. Yet within the series they form a community who strive to work together despite some obvious tensions. So of course the tensions of that diversity are one of the dramatic aspects of the story that they can play up at times. Now some critics of the zombie genre cite the violence directed towards the undead within the story as being distinctly antisocial. They claim these stories resonate with a primal need within people to exclude and destroy the other. Survivors versus zombies, which is in-group versus out-group, group competition. And it's easy to see how those critics reach that conclusion because there is typically a lot of violence in these stories. In fact, I have a wee graph here, which I'll explain. It's a little wee graph. So what this displays is the number of deaths that occur in the comic book version of The Walking Dead. So that's the original source material that this TV series is based on. It's been a very long-running comic book series. In fact, it's still being created now. So this is what it is. What it tallies is all of the people who have died through that comic book story and how they have died. So, but more interestingly, I think that's the sharp edge of this graph, as it were, is that it tallies up who kills who. And what it says down the bottom is overall, 79% of all the deaths, that's characters, human characters dying in the comic book, are people killing other people. 79% of the deaths in the story, while only 21% of the deaths occur from zombies killing people. That's a pretty clear weighting there. What this tells us is that in this vision of a violent world where zombies roam the earth, the greatest threat to human life is actually other humans. Let's not be too shocked by that. Isn't that actually true of the world we live in? As a species, humanity has developed many ways of destroying itself, from violent crime to weapons of mass destruction. Perhaps we should not be so fixated on pandemics as our media currently is, and start regarding each other with a little more caution. It's a lot more likely that one of us will harm the other. So there may be something to the criticism that the zombie narrative plays into antisocial human behaviour. It certainly plays off it, if not directly into it. Yet that does not negate my point that the protagonists in these stories represent a desire for authentic community. The zombie narrative is appealing because it suggests that in the face of adversity, many of the barriers which separate people simply disappear. Now in psychology, that's referred to as a superordinate goal. A superordinate goal. Surviving the zombies provides a greater purpose that unites a group of survivors. So, what else do you need to know? Well, fantasy, believe it or not, provides a safe place for theology. Within these stories, there are often characters giving voice to questions of faith, doubt, and longing. This occurs far more than in your typical mainstream drama or comedy. While the fictitious world of reanimated corpses looks a lot like our world, It is clearly fictional. Thus, writers in this genre are often more willing to wrestle with theological issues because the fictional characters who live in this alternative reality are free to give voice to anything. More than that, by painting a picture of a world where polite society no longer exists, questions of morality need to be examined all over again. In this regard, the zombie apocalypse suggests a world that I think open Christians fit into quite well, because it is a world where the wisdom of past generations must necessarily be abandoned in favour of truths appropriate for the present. It's quite progressive in that sense. There is a character in this program called Daryl. Now, when we meet Daryl, he is a redneck, he's quick to anger, and he's extremely aggressive. And so right from the start, he's very unlikable. And in fact, they set the story up that you're just waiting for this guy to get his comeuppance, frankly, because he's reckless. This is what we discover about him. But over time, this facade breaks down. Daryl's angry exterior gives way to a person of increasing emotional depth. In his own way, he becomes deeply connected to this strange community, this diverse community he's become a part of. And as his character develops, he finds at one particular point a particular item of clothing which he starts wearing. And so this is Daryl here on the right. It's a leather vest. Now, it's pretty clear from the symbolism what the creators of the television series want us to now think about Daryl. He, in some sense, is a guardian angel. When I show you the symbol like this, that seems pretty obvious. But for those who watch the series and who have walked Daryl's journey with him from aggressive, angry young man to this sort of loyal, reliable, steadfast hero at times, his evolution has actually been quite surprising. His story is littered with redemptive acts, which make him really one of the most popular characters in the series. He is one of the only characters to be there right from the beginning of this TV series, which is now well into its 5th series, and I haven't watched last night's episode yet, but touch wood, he's still around. So I like this character, I want to see him around for a while yet, and in this program nothing is guaranteed. So finally, a question Christians can ask of the zombie apocalypse. Apocalyptic literature is nothing new. We have examples of it in the Bible, such as the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, but there are many more examples beyond those. Now, many of you have heard my ponderings on apocalyptic thought before, and so I'm not going to rehash things too much, other than to acknowledge that for better or worse, it is part of Christian thought, even if it is often misunderstood in our time. In fact, and I wish I'd discovered this a couple of weeks ago when I was speaking on the rapture, actually, but as I was out in the neighbourhood earlier this week, I was passing a neighbouring church who have a great big billboard outside. Some of you might have seen it, and they're advertising this series at the moment. Are these the last days? Come and hear our international guest. In fact, they're meeting tonight, so maybe that's where the crowds are. I suspect I can guess within that context their answer to this particular question about whether this is the last days or not. What Christians in our time often get caught up in is the idea that apocalyptic literature is prophecy, with the clear understanding of prophecy as being prediction about the future. But that is not how such writings were interpreted in the time when they were written. What we can say with some certainty is that traditional apocalyptic literature has typically been produced during times of great persecution. The narrative of those things, like Daniel, like the book of Revelation, is structured in a way that suggests that while people are suffering now, they will be vindicated in the end, and justice will prevail. That's the message found in apocalyptic literature. Or to put that another way, it states clearly, things suck right now, but we will prevail. What that gives us is hope. It's a message of hope. Now that's certainly true of the book of Revelation, written at a time when Christians were being persecuted at the hands of the Roman Empire. The clear message of the text was, our people are experiencing great suffering, but we will get through this. We will conquer in the end. We will prevail. The victory might not be any time soon, but it will come. And so that's what Revelation is speaking into. That's the context of the writing. Now that message was incredibly important to a fledgling religion undergoing persecution, because let's face it, lots of people being imprisoned and executed is, well, it's bad for recruitment. Now some have argued just the opposite. They would claim, oh, persecution, great thing for a religion, you become martyrs. And yes, it might attract a certain personality, but let's face it, I'm not signing up to any group that's actually actively being persecuted and people are dying for their beliefs. That's not the way I'm wired. I don't think that's the way many of us are wired. My argument is that the zombie apocalypse is the apocalyptic literature of our time, except it differs from traditional apocalyptic literature in crucial ways. Firstly, the zombie apocalypse does not appear to have developed in response to an experience of persecution. So what's giving birth to it? And I'll be honest, I don't know. And secondly, the zombie narrative is not characterised by a message of hope, but in fact by the absolute opposite, an absence of hope. The message in zombie apocalypse is far more like things suck right now, and they're going to get worse. Now I began, right back at the start, by telling you a little bit about that classic movie, The Night of the Living Dead. And I apologise for anyone that I'm about to spoil the ending of this film for, because I'm about to tell you how it finishes. But like many stories in this genre, it ends with the protagonist dying. Having gone through all of these struggles, all of this difficulty, the climax of the story is that he doesn't actually make it. Similarly, at the conclusion of the first series of The Walking Dead, our group of survivors encounter a scientist. This character has been searching for a cure to the zombie crisis, but having failed in that particular work, he's reached a point of giving up all hope. It is this character who gives voice to the nihilistic overtones of the story. And here's a quote. "You know what's out there, a short, brutal life and an agonising death. There is no hope. There never was." So my question is, what is going so wrong for our younger generation that they get caught up in that message? They're attracted to watching things that say this sort of view of reality. Are issues such as climate change and social inequality so daunting that it is easier to despair than to hope for a better tomorrow? Christianity, at its heart, is a religion of hope. And yet that message doesn't seem to be getting out into the world in the way that it should be. I believe that as a church, we need to radically rethink how we engage with the younger, zombie-obsessed generation. If the message of the zombie apocalypse is that death prevails, we need new ways of articulating the simple truth that life prevails, that life evolves and changes and is drawing us into something greater. We need to find the message we can clearly articulate into an emerging worldview that is deeply pessimistic. Are we going to agree that things suck and will only get worse? Or can we call upon the riches of our tradition to offer an enticing alternative? And that's all I've got tonight.